I'm going to start doing some profile pieces on some of the people in this administration who are actively burning our country to the ground. They're not hit pieces, they're not gossip columns, and it's not performative outrage. What I want to understand, and hopefully help other people understand, is how people like this are formed, how their beliefs harden over time, and how their psychology interacts with power, and why they fit so naturally inside the current regime. This didn't come out of nowhere. Authoritarian systems don't appear overnight, and they don't run themselves. They're built by people with histories, incentives, blind spots, and very specific psychological traits that make them effective in environments where cruelty is reframed as strength and restraint is treated as weakness. If we only talk about policies, then we miss the rest of the machinery. If we only talk about Trump, then we miss the rest of the ecosystem. And if we only focus on outcomes, we never understand the processes that got us there. These profiles aren't about demonizing individuals for sport, they're about pattern recognition, tracing consistency over time and showing that what we're seeing right now isn't random chaos. It's a predictable result of putting certain personalities in positions where law becomes a tool, power becomes currency, and human cost becomes this abstract concept. History doesn't usually collapse because people like us are confused. It collapses because we stop recognizing danger while it's still explainable. So in that vein, I needed to slow this down and really start breaking it into chunks, one person at a time. History, evolution, psychology, and behavior, all of these are grounded in public record to show how systems like this actually function. Let's start with Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is one of the clearest examples of the kind of person an authoritarian system needs to function. He's not a figurehead or showman. He's an internal architect, someone who knows how to turn ideology into durable machinery and policy. It's not about a sudden transformation that happened when Trump came along either. Miller didn't become this way in the White House. He arrived fully formed. If you trace his history honestly, what you see is consistency. Miller grew up in Santa Monica, in an affluent, liberal, and culturally pluralistic community. His worldview didn't emerge from deprivation or marginalization, it emerged in opposition. From a young age, he defined himself against the environment around him. As a teenager, he went on conservative talk radio, attacked multiculturalism, criticized bilingual education, and framed cultural diversity as an existential threat. He didn't just disagree, he sought confrontation and amplification. That matters because early on he learned something essential. Conflict creates identity. Backlash becomes proof and opposition becomes fuel. At Duke University, that pattern hardened. He didn't soften to persuade his peers, he escalated. He wrote inflammatory columns, invited polarizing speakers onto talk shows, and he framed institutional pushback as ideological persecution. What emerged here is a defining trait: comfort with isolation. He doesn't need social approval. He doesn't seek consensus. He learns how to operate inside systems he dislikes without trying to reform them outright, only to outlast them and control their levers. That skill set's rare, and in certain political environments it's extremely valuable. After college, Miller apprenticed under Jeff Sessions, one of the most hardline immigration restrictionists in modern U.S. political history. This is where ideology met procedural machinery. Law, procedure, enforcement. He learned how to translate fear and narratives into legal language, how to turn bureaucracy into a weapon, and how to push policy to the edge of legality, and in doing so, absorb judicial pushback, make revisions, harden the language, and reissue it. By the time Trump entered the picture, Miller didn't need reshaping. He needed opportunity. And this is the part people often misunderstand, I think. Trump is not an ideologue. He's an amplifier. He supplies chaos, permission, and cover. People like Miller supply coherence, persistence, and execution. That's why Miller lasted when others didn't. He wasn't there for celebrity or proximity necessarily. He was there to build policy density, memos, rules, and executive actions that reshape reality, even after administrations change. Psychologically, Miller displays a pattern authoritarian systems reliably reward: an instrumental relationship to law, moral rigidity paired with flexibility toward harm, high threat sensitivity, zero-sum thinking, and comfort using suffering as deterrence. In that framework, cruelty isn't accidental, it's functional. Pain is how systems and the people that live inside of those systems learn. That's why family separation wasn't an accident, why asylum restrictions were designed to be punitive, and why deterrence was always framed in terms of human cost. It wasn't incompetence, it was intent, executed through legal channels. This is why Stephen Miller fits the Trump regime so well. Authoritarian systems don't primarily need charismatic leaders. They need people who enforce with certainty, hesitate rarely, and treat legitimacy as optional when outcomes are at stake. Miller isn't trying to persuade the country. He's trying to reshape the systems until resistance becomes structurally irrelevant. That's the danger. Not volatility or theatrics, but patience, paired with ideological certainty and procedural power. This is what the regime selects for. And I think it's worth asking why someone like Donald Trump specifically surrounds himself with people like Stephen Miller. Trump doesn't benefit from advisors who complicate his instincts with ethics or norms or long-term consequences. He doesn't want consensus builders or institutional stewards. What he wants are translators and enforcers, people who can take his impulses and turn them into action without slowing them down, people who can convert grievance into policy, and people who are willing to absorb the moral cost so that he doesn't have to. Someone like Miller gives Trump distance from the damage while still delivering results. He provides ideological coherence without requiring Trump to understand it. And he builds durable mechanisms that outlast headlines. Stephen Miller turns chaos into leverage and cruelty into order, all while keeping Trump insulated from detail and consequence. This relationship is transactional and efficient. Trump gets outcomes without restraint, and Miller gets proximity to power and the authority to harden his worldview into law. Neither needs the other to be morally consistent, only effective. That's how systems like this work, not through shared values, but through aligned incentives, and not through principle, but through utility. And that's why focusing only on Trump misses the point. Leaders like him don't operate alone. They rely on people who are willing to do the grinding, unglamorous work of enforcement, people who believe deeply, like I said, hesitate rarely, and see human cost as acceptable collateral. That's the machine. And understanding who builds it and why they're chosen matters just as much as understanding who stands at the front of it. This is the first piece. There's going to be more like this. I'm Ian. This is the Decency Rebellion.